spectrum of alkaloids working on you from 10 different directions in the middle of this. The wonderful thing about chacruna, the Psychotria viridis, the admixture, the normal admixture to ayahuasca, is when you do an HPLC or a mass spec on that, it's just DMT. It's a pure spike of NN-dimethyltryptamine, nothing else hanging on to it. And I think they are such subtle folk chemists that they have discerned this, not only located every possible source of DMT in this ecosystem of several 100,000 species, but then discerningly focused in on those that have the cleanest of these signatures. So it's a very impressive thing. And to what end, you may ask? I mean, somebody asked me, do they just take these things for fun? And the answer is not at all. They are regulating their psychic world. They are when ayahuasca was first described by people like Richard Spruce and Theodor Koch-Grünberg and these early people into the Amazon, they spoke in terms of a telepathic drug. They felt that these small groups of deep forest Indians were actually entering into group states of mind with this stuff. Well, then, in the sort of hard reductionist era of pharmacology, this was, of course, completely poo-pooed and dismissed. But now, with our planet in crisis, I think we need to go back and look at this. I have had extraordinary experiences in ayahuasca sessions. Kat isn't here, so she can't tell the story, but some of you may recall the story. In Don Fidel Mozambique's circle, he had a nephew. This guy was worthless. He was a small-time weed dealer, part-time pimp, mostly ne'er-do-well, but because he was the sobrino, the shaman's nephew, he couldn't just be tossed out. And he would come to these ayahuasca sessions, and the shaman, Don Fidel, Don Jose, the old guys, would sing these beautiful songs in Quechua, and he would sing against them. He would sing while they were singing. He would sing a different song. And these people, I don't know how true it is generally in Peru, but these Loretanos, the people of Loreto, are such fine people, they will never directly confront a social outrage. So everybody in the circle was uncomfortable with this guy, didn't want him back. It was the main topic of conversation when we all weren't loaded. But when we were loaded, there he would be, hassling the group. So finally, after about the third time this came, there were about 30 of us in the shed. Don Jose, this older guy, had made the ayahuasca, and he was quite proud of it. He was showing it off, and it was god-awful strong. And Don Jose, the sobrino, was sitting across from me, and as these waves of hallucination would come, I would see him, and he would turn into like a monkey, a howler monkey, or a monkey with a dog's face, and just these weird animal transformations, and everybody else was staying the same. Well, Kat, who is a little less mealy-mouthed than I am, finally had all she was going to take of this guy. And we were all sitting there, and she just looked across the room. She just gave him what in English parlance is called a look that would kill. And he physically staggered backwards. And what I saw was these red darts come out of her eyes and go across the room. The singing stopped. Yes, the singing stopped instantly, and Don Fidel turned to one of the old guys and said, "She sends the..." And the other guy said, "Yes," and it was just this. It was a telepathic group experience where someone had been able to zing somebody else, and 30 people had seen it as a real thing. Well, I think the potential for this kind of thing for problem solving is immense.
Well, the thing I used to be in politics as we have them today.
Do you want to say something? No? Well, and you see, what they'll tell you in the Amazon, these ayahuasqueros, is the purpose of each journey when it is not to cure. And the shaman I spent the most time with, he did public curing sessions on Saturday nights, and everyone was welcome. On Wednesday nights, he took double doses, and it was a very small, intimate group, and he said, "This is for knowing. Now we don't cure. This is to know and to see." And what this consisted of was the recovery out of the hallucinogenic state of what are called icaros. Icaros are magical songs, and the more of them you have, they are taught to you by the plant spirit, and the more of them you have, the more powerful a shaman you are. Well, these icaros, when you listen to recordings of them, they're quite beautiful, quite extraordinary. But when you're with the people, it's made very clear that an icaro is not something you listen to. An icaro is something you look at. You look at it. It is to be seen, even though it is made out of sound. As a composition, as a work of art, it is offered more in the vein of a painting than a song or a poem. What is happening is that in this group state of mind, the intentionality of the singer is beheld as a three-dimensional modality of light and of color. Well, this is like an ontological transformation of language itself. Language, you see, we have eyes, ears, and tactile sensory receptors. They break the world of incoming perception, the electromagnetic radiation and the acoustical waveforms falling on our bodies are canalized by the senses into these narrow streams of input, the visual input, the audio input, the tactile input. In the ayahuasca state, a synesthesia comes into being. Well, synesthesia in our context is a rare medical word, but if you know anything about Romanticism and the literary movements of the 19th century, the pursuit of synesthesia is what drove the French symbolists and the Romantics. They saw this melding of the senses as a higher, a transformation of the ontos of art, and I believe it so to be. I think that what history is for is to give us a technology that will allow us to share our hallucinations. And they, the people of the Amazon, these los tribus, the tribal groups, have perfected a shamanic technology that allows them to do the same thing. It's this ability to display to your intimates the contents of your own head that creates a larger organism than simply the ego. And there are so many problems here with translating these concepts from language to language. The shamans of the Amazon may not even grok fully that it is this collective state of mind that is so empowering to them and that we don't have. How do you know what it's like to be inside the clothing of another culture? Well, you don't know. But the modality, the benchmark that the pharmacological fact of the chemistry of consciousness gives you allows you to work out from a given a kind of map of what must be going on. That's why the shaman's remark that it's so hard to take ukuhe was interesting. It meant that, he was making a statement about the human condition. He was saying, it's hard for us to do this, just the way it's hard for you to do this. I've discussed this with mushroom shamans in Mexico and ayahuasqueros in South America. They say it is not easy to do this. It is not easy to plunge into this hallucinogenic maelstrom. No culture prepares you for the modalities of the psychedelic experience. A culture can give you personal authenticity, self-control, and courage. These things will serve you well, but in terms of preparing you for what you will experience, it's virtually inconceivable. I think that the great gift that is going to come out of ayahuasca is the ability to open our heads to each other, to truly de-individuate, to truly create for ourselves a group mind, and now on a global scale. You see, the masculine engineering mentality is just running along behind the feminist, shamanist parade, hardwiring all the changes into technology. The engineering mentality doesn't believe it unless it turns on with a red light when you hit the button. But all that the engineering mentality can dream of or ever accomplish, it's in place in this vegetable matrix, this other way of doing it that doesn't give you much to show. No Amazonian shaman can point to an edifice like the World Trade Center or an atom smasher or a moon probe and say, the genius of my worldview allowed me to create these things. But the genius of their worldview allows them to create authentic caring, reasonable transmission of gnosis from one generation to another, an ability to walk lightly on the earth, an ability to intuit the needs and feelings of other people. And this is what we lack, is any sort of emotional sensitivity, any sort of ability to call on the racial mind at its roots to authenticate us personally in moments of stress and crisis. This is the ego really is a poor substitute for authentic being. And it's the poor substitute for authentic being that we have, each and every one of us, opted for. Man, woman, oldster, child. The neurotic programming is so deep that it is very difficult to transcend it. You see, I think, and Nicole is certainly a part of this phenomenon, that what really has happened, let's just say in the 20th century, it is that anthropologists, ethnographers, botanists, geographers, linguists have gone out to the four corners of the globe, the wastes of the Kalahari, the Amazon jungles, the storm-beaten shores of Kerguelen, all of these places, and they have come back with information. These people copulate in this position. These people intoxicate with this kind of thing. These people treat wealthy people this way. These people treat homosexuals this way. These people believe identical twins are this and that. All these ideas and technologies in the form of drugs, basically. And every jungle has consciousness transforming potential within it, not all equally, but no jungle, no ecosystem is so poor that you can't find a consciousness transforming element in it. Well, as we now sort through this vast smorgasbord of options, should we practice the oracular systems of the Azande? Shall we all become Mahayanas? Shall we take up Sufi practices? What is our relationship to the shamanism of Tierra del Fuego? As all of this is sorted out in a kind of evolutionary fury, certain things are going to come to the fore. And I think it's not the form, not the ritual, but the way in which these things empower being, empower the physiology, the felt experience of being, and empower the cognitive processing and the integrative processing that goes on between people. And in the world of paradisical Taoistic integration that I hypothesize preceded history still exists in the Amazon, in these basically in the ayahuasca complex, but then in all the other complexes that are the feathering out of the edges of that. The archaic consciousness lives. This is why I think we are so strongly drawn to involve ourselves with these archaic people, because we recognize that they have answers to questions that we couldn't even ask until the 1960s. Do you want to say anything about any of this, Nicole? Or shall we ask people for questions?
I would like to be asked questions. I like even to be interrupted when I'm talking and asked questions. What do you mean by that?
What is your experience with ayahuasca? Repeat them.
Mine?
What is your experience with ayahuasca?
Well, it's about the usual, I would say. Actually, they usually don't give me a strong enough dose, because they think I'm, an old lady and delicate or something. And so I haven't had such vivid experiences as so frequently, or such enduring experiences. I just get flashes on and off usually. It's very hard for me to convince anybody that I am really a very tough old lady. And so they give me, mine have been oddly disappointing usually. For example, one night I couldn't see anything except the temples in Thailand. And I'd seen those already, so I wanted to see something new. And very elaborate Indonesian architecture. That wasn't what I wanted. And I kept saying, Senorita Ayahuasca, because that's the way you must address her. Please, turn it off and get me something else. But incidentally, the respect for such plants must always be shown, not only in your mind, but verbally, and in the handling. When a witch doctor friend gave me my first, he sang a song to it when he dug it up. And he sang, Dear Senorita Ayahuasca, I am very sorry to have you leave me, but you are going to Senorita Nicole. She will be good to you. She is a good person. You will love her. She will love you very much. Please grow big and strong and active. And that is the way you must transplant. Did you do that with yours?
Oh yes, and I blow tobacco smoke and the whole bit.
Very possible. But they are extremely aware of plant sensitivity, of course, and must always respect it. And the Carlos, these magical songs, are so much a part. I was sometimes told that they didn't think the plants would work for me, especially when it was something they didn't want to give me, because it was taboo, because I didn't know the song. Or if I knew it, I couldn't sing it properly, because nobody could who was not a Toto, for example. Did you have that experience?
Oh yes, and they're very proud of the difficulty of these languages. These languages are extremely difficult to learn. Nicole's experience of finding it difficult to get thoroughly loaded is somewhat typical. There are a lot of problems. I mean, it took me a long time to get stoned in a native situation, because they always gave me too little, because they're all little. And they had a notion of the dose, and it just would barely rock my boat when it was clearly very intense for them. if you find yourself in South America sometime pursuing these mysteries, you may have to resign yourself to drinking a lot of swill before you get to something swell. I didn't really understand ayahuasca till I made it, till I was able to repeatedly make it and each time add more Secotria viridis to intensify the visions, and finally I got it where I wanted it. You see, one of the things there's so many things about ayahuasca that are interesting. It really is a unique thing. First of all, it is technically a drug in the sense that it's not a plant, it's not just one plant. With morning glory seeds, with peyote, with mushrooms, with datura, with cannabis. This is one plant. Ayahuasca is a binary weapon. You have two things which have to be combined for it to be effective. Well, now that not only means that it is a combinatory thing, potentially different each time, because the ratios are potentially different, it also brings the human element in very strongly, because it's going to be about who made it, in the same way that a souffle is about who made it, while a glass of water is not about who made it. And so personalities become involved here. Well then, because it's something made, it can be made strong or weak. It can be diluted. Now, if you're into it for the money, all you have to do is cut it 50% and you've got twice as much money and the stuff is half as good. This is familiar to all of you, I'm sure, who've dealt street drugs, this equation. You know, if you cut it by half, you make more money, but the stuff is garbage. Even liquor, the horror of cutting fine liquor and what that does to it. So you really have to know your guy or gal if it is the rare case when it is the ayahuasquera comes into the picture. There are ayahuasqueras. When Kat and I were in the Amazon in '76, we tracked down and spent time with Manuel Cordova Rios, who some of you may know his book, The Wizard of the Upper Amazon, by Bruce Lamb, is about Manuel Cordova Rios. Well, when we met him in '76, he was 93. He looked 55, but he did die a couple of years later. But he was still curing people and seeing people. And well, that reflects on my story. Nicole says he was an awful liar. We went to him, he was in Iquitos, and we said, we want real ayahuasca, we want the real thing. He said, you have to leave Iquitos, everyone here is a liar, a mentirosa. So he said, there is a woman, Juana Gonzalez Obi. Have you ever heard of her?
No.
His story was that as a 17-year-old girl, many years before, she had contracted leprosy. And there was no cure available to her except that he cured her with ayahuasca, but not before she lost her hands and feet. So she was clearly a heavy-duty person and had a great reputation. And we pursued her to Pucallpa, to Yarinacocha. We finally actually found her relatives, but she had gone to the Andes for a few months to cure. But in the process of trying to find Juana Gonzalez Obi, we met all these other curanderos. And this is often the way of it in the Amazon. You look for one thing only to have a reason for being there, and what you really are fated to find is something far different.
Serendipity is Amazon travel.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, it is.
Hello.
And you'd better be good at it. Isn't it time for lunch or something? It's getting tired of sitting.
It's getting close. Maybe we should break for lunch. It's a few minutes.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we could take a couple more questions.
You were talking about admixture, and did you have any comment of that admixture of the Torahs into the ayahuasca or
Not Brugmansia.
Did you ever deal with Brugmansia?
I've heard of it's being used in it, but I'm scared of Brugmansia. I have known personally one case in which it killed so many brain cells, cortical cells, that the man was totally incurable, meninges, nobody could help.
Yes. Besides the DMT, which is added to the ayahuasca to make it highly visionary, then there are what's called tertiary admixtures, a third component, and this is what Ken is asking about. There are many, many of these tertiary admixtures.
I have 20 or 30 listed.
And most of them, when you get them into the lab, are chemically complex. They are probably...
Some are quite useless.
Some are useless, but some, I'm sure, push it all over the map.
Yes.
And Datura is certainly one. Brugmansia is one. There are abuta species. There are a number of these. But I'm still trying to master the two. I have, in Hawaii, many of these tertiary admixtures, but that's real magic. That you don't get. Pardon me?
You have to test those things before you use them.
Yes, because they could be they could be mutagenic, and a lot of people, really terrible things go on in Peru. I mean, you have to be sure of your ayahuasquero. I had some friends who went to Lamas near Tarapoto, and they documented an ayahuasquero there who, when his ayahuasca was all done, just to give it the proper zing, he would hit it with a tablespoon of creosote. Well, creosote is not only awful, paint it on a mouse's ears, and 2 weeks later the mouse will have tumors on its ears. It's about the worst thing you could possibly come up with.
All sorts of things. I knew of one who put kerosene in it.
Yeah, kerosene.
Kerosene, of course, is considered a great cure for snake bite.
Right, they always want
I remember
to.
landing in a village when, now, if anybody was sick, I had a lot of good medicines with me. In the early days when I didn't know so much about didn't believe in plant medicines. And they said, yes, there was a man there who had been bitten by a snake, a feather lance, a few weeks before, and he still wasn't well, that he'd had 2 whole bottles of kerosene.
Yeah.
I remember that John Juan would teach Carlos about singing songs with mescaline, and with the ayahuasca, there's songs. Are there songs to learn with the magic mushroom?
Yes, I think singing is sound, and language is what this is all about. I mean, we are not given to this, or I suppose I shouldn't make a generalized statement, but it's not my general tendency to burst into joyful song. But on the mushroom, voice, the purity of tone, the control, the almost synthesizer-like stability of the tone is shocking. Plus you can see it. You swipe this way and you leave a chartreuse trail. You come down through it this way with a magenta stripe. You are sculpting in this audio dimension. Yes, all of this small family of hallucinogens that I talk of with such enthusiasm, they're all related. Psilocybin is a tryptamine. Ayahuasca is a pharmacological strategy for activating DMT. The snuffs from the kumala trees are DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. The drugs, the compounds that interest me are vanishingly small compared to the whole cornucopia of pharmaceutical nature. I'm not into the whole cyclicized amphetamine series, including MDMA and MDA. I find that not very compelling. The short-acting anesthetics ultimately seem to me to be somewhat uninteresting. I'm just a fanatic for this one thing because I want to very strongly make the point that, altered states, there are just thousands of altered states. Panic, love, despair, hatred, loathing, anxiety, and boredom, and drug states. You know, two scotches and an Irish coffee, all of this stuff. But what I'm interested in is this very specific thing that seems to me so transcendental and peculiar. It isn't a mirror to self. These tryptamines ultimately will be superseded in psychotherapy by something else, because they're not the best instrument for looking at the cracked personality. What they are is a tremendous instrument for looking at the invisible dimensions of the larger universe of mind. That's what they are for. So I think you should be through your stuff before you come to this. It will psycholytically clean you out. The first few trips will then be directed toward your stuff. And many people never push beyond that. They just say, my God, it was so horrible dealing with my fears and anxieties and stupidities and self-betrayals that I'm never going to go back. But if you will persist, eventually it no longer becomes about you. You become the small figure in the foreground of a vast and unfolding cosmic drama, not a personal drama. And that's the shamanic perspective. And every shaman must go through this shedding of personal identity to then reach an accommodation with it. That's why when I encounter the mind behind the plant, what I always say to it is, show yourself, reveal yourself. Let me see as much of you as I can stand. Don't tailor it for me. Don't kowtow to my needs. Push me to the limit. Let me see as much of your quintessence as I can imbibe without overflowing. Well, we'll talk more about this afternoon. Thank you very much. Good. Dealt with? Yeah.
Yeah, you suggest that shamanism is like the way to get man into a harmony with Earth and sort of back to nature sort of thing. Are there other ways, and if there are, do they have any commonalities?
Well, I guess shamanism is what has been focused in on as the overarching metaphor, because all of these potential responses seem to lead somehow in that direction. I mean, the concept of shamans spans the notion in the modern usage from manager to poet. So it's a pretty broadly based concept. It's exalting a superior form of planning, which we could use some of at this point here. Okay, well, what we thought we would do this afternoon is I would talk for a little bit, and then maybe Nicole would respond to that if she felt like it, and then we would leave more time for questions than we left in the morning. I think both Nicole and I feel that the fruitful thing, the most interesting thing, is the questions, because left unquestioned, I tend to fall into my own creodes of habit and just repeat certain favorite numbers. But if you want to jog it in some different direction or cast it in a different light, then the question thing is good for that. The subject matter of this weekend is Amazonian shamanism, specifically named in the title. And I think this gives us permission to talk more about some of the details of shamanism in the Amazonian situation than we might in a weekend that was devoted to the planetary crisis generally, or some of the broader cosmic themes that I sometimes deal with. But I think one thing that is a common thread from the cosmic view to the particularized sensitivity to what is happening in the Amazon is the content as we can describe it of what these shamans are experiencing. Can we build a common language about this other dimension? And if we can, what does this common language begin to look like? So I thought this afternoon I would just remind you of some of the old metaphors for this alternative dimension, the beta matrix, the other realm, and then some possible new wrinkles on it. And I'm speaking now particularly of the intensified states that are associated with this shamanic complex of plants based on tryptamine. So it's a worldwide phenomenon. DMT is rarely distributed in any plant in sufficient quantity that it can trigger an unambiguous intoxication without somehow being concentrated. Either you have to extract and concentrate the bark, or you have to do a hot water extraction of the leaf, or in some way it has to be concentrated. Yet nevertheless, over the millennia, people have located the sources of this phenomena and spared no effort to make it available in a religious and shamanic context. Well, so what is it? The experience is can be very compressed and brief. In a typical DMT experience where it has been smoked, the onset of the experience is on the order of 30 seconds, and the duration on the order of 5 to 7 minutes. With ayahuasca, and sometimes the way the tribal people do it is they boost it. They take a second hit some hours into the thing. You can prolong these states of intense visionary synesthesia for hours. But, yeah?
Is the DMT content in Psychotria enough to get off the smoke the leaves?
No, I don't think so. A typical dose of ayahuasca that would be highly visionary will have 85 wet weight grams of Psychotria viridis in it. I would estimate that to be close to maybe 15 dry weight of Psychotria. And that amount of DMT, if smoked by itself, not in the presence of an MAO inhibitor, would not be effective. You see, the genius of the ayahuasca pharmacology is that beta-carboline alkaloids like harmine and harmaline are being used to lower the threshold of sensitivity to DMT, so that a dose of DMT that would normally be not perceived is in fact, absolutely flattens you, because your sensitivity has been raised by the inhibition of these enzyme systems. Well, what is this like experientially? Well, it's as though, in the first 5 seconds, the room clears of air. Everything, all colors brighten. It's as though the air has been sucked out of the room. Everything brightens. There's a generalized feeling of anesthesia, perhaps localized in the skin. And then you close your eyes, and there is a mandalic formation of undifferentiated red and orange. This is some kind of, what you're actually seeing is the bow shock of this gradient of unusual neurochemistry hitting the synaptic membrane. One by one, the synapses are giving up their normal affinity for serotonin and instead converting over to the bioelectric dynamic molecule that is being suddenly offered to them. And as this occurs on a scale of millions and then tens of millions of synaptic locations, a higher cortical experience comes into being. There is a sound like the compression of a cellophane wrapper, a kind of crackling sound, and then a penetration into this alternative reality, some kind of a modality of light and distance and dimensionality that is somehow inhabited. This is the real shocker for the modern positivist, reductionist mind, that it is a world of spirit, of animate intelligence, of comprehending and relating that suffuses every atom of existence. And if you ask a shaman, what is this? He will answer without hesitation, oh, well, it's the realm of the dead, it's the afterlife, these are our ancestors. What he doesn't explain is why one's ancestors should look like they're made out of gold and brass and be puttering around like jeweled basketballs, speaking in hyperdimensional syntactical languages which condense on the floor in front of you. Apparently, these are questions which are reserved for a deeper level of initiation. But in any case, they say, oh, these are the ancestors. Well, this is I've been in this biz for 20 years, and at some time in the past I must have faced this and repressed it. But recently it has come to me what a stunning denouement this would actually be if this is truly and in fact what shamanism is about, and that we merely have to open ourselves to what these people are saying. And what they are saying is there is a chemical technology for accessing the beyond, this higher mathematical manifold where that which has been and that which will be is somehow kept, some Blakean domain of potentiality that can be accessed. This would explain this hair-raising sense of familiarity that attends the contact with the utterly bizarre and unexpected, so that when the cognitive dissonance that accretes itself around this ecstasy is composed of two parts. It is that, my God, I can't believe this is happening, or even that I could perceive it if it were. And the second part is, this is totally familiar to me. This is more familiar than any other part of my life. This is my place. And the cognitive dissonance that ricochets between those places approaches unbearable. I was talking with a chemist a few weeks ago, an old friend of mine, and he was saying, well, what do you think about DMT in terms of risk? And I said, well, the risk is death by astonishment. That's what you're really courting. And, if you don't think that's possible, it's because you've never done this, because you pass that close. I mean, you just say, this is amazement on a spectrum which could kill you if you let it run out of control, because it is so intense. It is so improbable, and yet so familiar. Well, if it were somehow tied into this afterworld domain, this would all begin to make a certain weird kind of sense. Rupert Sheldrake has suggested what he calls necrotic biochemistry, that the dying process is actually the process of release of tryptamines into deep brain structure. Well, okay, so you've got this modality, and there's stuff going on there. Well, what kind of stuff is it? Well, chiefly it seems to be a kind of domain where information is being passed around. Information is being offered, and it's being traded. And I've often tried in reconstructing these experiences to feel into, where have I had this feeling before? This feeling which I now have fear of being killed. It's a fear of being sort of screwed. In other words, it's a fear of being taken to the cleaners, being had, being having my purse slashed, essentially. It's a feeling which I associate with the Crawford Market in Bombay, where in a dark period in my past I had to carry out intricate semi-legal transactions which left me sleepless for nights. So then I had the idea, why do I think that? Why do I get this feeling from the ancestor souls that they are trying to take me for a short ride? And I realized it's because they are traders. They are traders of means. This is what they love. They collect and trade ideas. So when you burst into this shamanic space where Yggdrasil, the magic world ash, is rooted on a plain of travertine and is flames before you, when you break into this place, what they offer are gifts. They say, look at this, look at this, look at this. And these things are like miracles, toys, bubbles, Fabergé eggs, Cellini goldwork, jewels, and and yet they sing, they speak poetry, they create their own objects which they offer to you. And in the midst of all of this cacophonous, elfin confusion and opulence and syntactical richness, you're trying to perform the eidetic reduction and figure out what the hell is going on here and what's real and what's not and what you can tell your lover and what you can tell your mother. And it's a craziness. After many years of being completely bludgeoned by this kind of thing, I finally understood, through making a kind of composite map of these trips, many of them overlaid over each other, that the place that you break through to, and all the high-dose tryptamine experiences lead toward this, is it's like a receiving area for a human being. It's like a playpen. It's someone very odd's idea of a reassuring environment for a human being. You know, sort of a cross between French bordello and early hyperspace. I mean, there's a lot of cut plush velvet and chrome and warm and domed and you're supposed to like this. You're supposed to say, how thoughtful. And then, you know, but somebody is looking in from another dimension and saying, you know, the human subject seems to have accepted the conditions in the reception area, something like that. I don't know what to make of this. I mean, I started out a rationalist and have ended up the pathetic creature you see before you. Well, and it was because I poked into the wrong places. I discovered, and many of you probably have too, or are soon about to, that reality is a very thinly spun cultural fiction. And as long as you stay on Main Street, it all holds together pretty well, you know. But my God, just walk down one of these alleys off Main Street and you discover, you know, channeling, psychic healing, the dreams of Atlantis, the this, the that, an endless cornucopia of fuzzy thinking. And in that, you know, there are nuggets of genius, because Main Street is clearly nowheresville. I mean, it's just male dominator, linear, post-Cartesian, high-tech, materialist, positivist, so forth and so on, the litany you know so well. So the great excitement for me in this shamanic dimension and why I speak to it and what excites me is the fact that here is something totally unexpected. beyond our wildest dreams. I mean, you may have believed in flying saucers, but did you ever believe that they would land in your bedroom? I mean, that's the promise which this stuff holds out. Something is curiously awry with our cultural machinery, and apparently we have a huge blind spot to a dimension of animate, organized, and non-human intelligence. You know, is it God? Is it the space people? Is it the goddess, the Gaian mind, the vegetable matrix of the planet, the light pump of the solar system? Who knows what it is? The fact is not to know what it is, but to experience it, to verify that this is going on. And that's the big news that the cataloging of cultural bric-a-brac brings back in the example of shamanism, saying, you know, oh, that turned out to be phony, and this was done with smoke and mirrors, and for this they used pig guts or something. But these people, and that was how I did it. I mean, I went to India years ago as an ingenue and sat at the feet of these guys and sought wisdom. And, you know, it wasn't until I got to the jungle that people were willing to show me into this, the dimension that exceeded my wildest dreams. I mean, that's it. And my dreams are pretty wild. And they were then, and I'm sure yours are as well. And yet, even if we dream together, we cannot dream the frontiers of what is possible, because in our world of entropy and tawdriness and betrayal and stupidity, there is also, you know, the unspeakable, improbable presence of this thing in these plants. And, you know, I believe it called us forth out of primate organization. I believe that history is an effort to come to terms with this, a kind of hysterical love affair with the unthinkable, where, you know, you embrace it for 1,000 years, then you burn all your cities and books and persecute it for 1,000 years, and then you go mad and flip the coin again, because it's here with us. It is with us, tangible, experienceable, and yet not rationally apprehendable. It is the confounding of rationalism. And rationalism is the weapon by which the ego segregates the world. Me and them, inside, outside, my tribe, their tribe, the good people, the bad people. This segregation of the ego. This is the neurotic response that somehow comes out of the trauma of our evolution on the planet. Our mother has been turbulent. Our childhood was turbulent. I evoked this morning when I talked about how 9 times the glaciers rolled south from the poles. I mean, we were left alone in the apartment a lot is the practical equivalent of this. So now, finding our way back, we can't get out of this mess without a miracle. I mean, it's like the Grateful Dead sing, you know, you need a miracle every day. And the only miracle around seems to lie in this strange domain of this shamanic dimension, that against all odds and probability, there is help or something nearby. Anyway, the strange flickering light of an unvisited farmhouse, and we're broken down on the road with a double flat and rain is pouring. So we are going to have to make our way toward this thing which beckons and which seems to have shaped our history. And these Amazonian people kept the faith. During the prodigal wanderings of Western men through history, the Amazon peoples kept this faith, which the memory of which they had carried over the land bridge from the Eurasian continent, the oldest religion in history, the doorway out of ordinary time and into the presence of the elder things, whatever they may be. We don't even know. Our history is a fiction spun so thin that we are like children in the face of this possibility. H.P. Lovecraft, where are you now that we need you? Well, anyway, that's just sort of a way of evoking the space, the depth of the mystery. What we are talking about is not bright colors or paisley wallpaper that is found not to exist in the morning, but the best kept secret in the whole history of the human race, the fact that there is this alien dimension nearby and accessible through plants at great risk and with great benefit, something to which we have become culturally completely deadened. And hopefully a gathering like this is a permission, now that we are poised with a knife at the heart of the world, to ask the question, what is the world? What is this thing we are about to kill out of our greed for condominiums and parking space? Do we understand what we are doing? Can we understand what we are doing? Difficult questions. Let's hope that there are easy answers, because we have hardly time for any other sort, because the momentum of this thing is so great. The answer must be nearby. It must be within us, because we haven't time to go anywhere else or meet anyone else and understand them and apply their solution. We don't have that kind of time. We have to dream it up. The submarine is sinking now. What are you going to do about it? Well, I think that I personally felt that I searched the surface of reality like a blind person, probing for a chink, an opening, a possibility in the seamless surface of the high walls that seem to hem us in, the prison of Gnostic iron that the Mandayans placed at the center of the universe. And the chink in the armor is this radiant otherness that is showing through the plants. And what it is, who knows? What it's for, who knows? But that it loves us, that it too is reaching out toward us, is self-evident. And how can we not respond to that? We don't know what reality is. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we are. We are lost, and this is beckoning light, warmth, affection, and understanding for the plight of humanity. Shamans have always healed their people and predicted the weather and predicted the movement of game and this sort of thing out of resonance with this greater mind in nature, which has sheltered the human family over millennia. I mean, it is the unseen partner. It is the goddess. It's a real thing. And now it must somehow be invoked operationally again because of our predicament as a result of having turned away from that. So the task is to understand all this, each in our own way, and then to communicate it to others to understand each in their own way, and to build a Gailanic consensus for life. For life. Because it's the only thing we know that has given us self-reflection. So, Nicole, do you have anything to say about that? Or
Well, I believe, Terence, that you have been given a much wider experience in this, a much more vivid and probably valuable experience than most people. Why is that? Why do, for example, most of the Indians I know have, or perhaps just not able to explain it or to talk about it, But most of them say, well, they saw a tigre and some snakes, or they went to a beautiful city, and much simpler understanding.
I think it's language.
You think?
I think that
It very well could be.
That every single one of these Indians has seen things no human soul ever saw before. That it's a richness of beauty before which one is inarticulate. As to why I can do it, well, maybe necessity is the mother of invention. I'm not a stockbroker. And we can always blame the Irish. But I don't like to do that because that shuts everybody else out. And I don't believe for a moment, and in fact I might say that, to me the important thing about this experience is I really believe that everyone can have it. That this is something almost, it's no exaggeration to compare it to sexuality. This is a potentiality in the human organism that if you go to the grave without knowing about this, it's rather equivalent to going to the grave with your virginity intact. This is an enormous area of what it is to be alive. I mean, and it blows my mind to think that the last 50 generations of people in Europe created all that philosophy and science and diplomacy and so forth and so on without a single person being stoned for a single moment all those centuries. I mean, it's pretty much gristle and beer, isn't it, folks, when you look at the accomplishments of European civilization. So I think it takes practice, though, to access these states, and I'll respond.
That was another thing I was going to ask. Your initial experiences with anything like that?
My initial experiences were kind of funny. It always seemed to hit me very hard. I was thinking the other day of, for some reason, I hadn't thought of it for years. I think I was remarking the anniversary of it or something, about the very, very first time that I took LSD. And I took it in someone's apartment in San Francisco. And for me, the world divided into two great polar opposites. And perhaps it's still true in some strange way. One side of the thing was called the Iosteks. And they were like God. They were everything profound. I mean, to utter this word was to hurl yourself on the ground and press your face into the dirt. It was like invoking a Faustian flame, miles in extent. That was the Iosteks. At the other polarity were this something called the Pinkestairs. And they were hilarity and elfin dissolution into the minute. And I was just hurled between the antipodes of these two crazed, concrescent concepts for about 14 hours. And very peculiar. But by techniques, what I wanted to say was, because it will be useful, I assume, to people here, you do it in darkness, and in silence, and in reverence, on an empty stomach, free from distraction, with attention to breath. That's all. Now, what do we see? What does this operationally look like? It looks like a person sitting alone in a dark room, quietly breathing, or meditating, or something like that. That's all you see. That's the exterior manifestation of the sadhana. And what is going on is this person is navigating an internal river system of great complexity. Syntactical Niagaras are pouring over internal precipices of perception and remembrance. And, it's very intense. I mean, I have had experiences where I swore that everybody from Seattle to San Diego must have just thrown themselves under their desks to escape the blast, and it was just happening between my ears, you know. I mean, it's like watching a thermonuclear explosion through 50 feet of absolutely clear crystal, and, you know, you're in violet, but what's raging in the optical pathway is like the collapse of a universe, or the birth of a universe.
The first time you took ayahuasca, was it that intense?
No, it took years of fiddling with ayahuasca because they don't make it right. I won't take anybody's but my own, just because they're not heavy enough on the foot pedal of the Psychotria. I think they want to.
That's it.
They want to graze the surface of it, and you know, I want impact. So I really push that because that's what fascinates me, the visions. I mean, some people say you're just a vision freak, that these wonderful feelings and thoughts, and it's true that all is there, but there is something so convincing to my mind about a hallucination because it's so intricate and happening in real time, and you're just looking at this thing jaw agape. You could never draw it, you could never have previously imagined it, and yet it must in some sense be said to be yours because it's happening in your mind. And so then you wonder, well, what is my relationship to this thing? It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Did I make it? Does it come out of me? Or is it no more me than me standing looking at the evening star? What is the source of this transcendent beauty that resides within the human nervous system? I confess I don't have the answer. I think that's I am basically a Platonist, and then when you couldn't support that anymore because of advances in modern philosophy, I retooled as a phenomenologist. But I'm still basically a Platonist, and I believe that the good, the true, and the beautiful are somehow facets of the same notion. And for me, the pursuit of beauty has been the fastest way to get entangled with the true and the good. Now, for somebody else, it might be different. But this beauty that we find resident within ourselves is, I think, the strongest argument that I personally know of that we are more than clay, that we are, caught up in a cosmic drama of salvation and redemption of some sort. I don't say what sort. I'm very leery of that. But that we are caught up in a cosmic drama of salvation and redemption, and the covenant that she has made with human beings is symbolized by the psychedelic experience, in the same way that God's covenant with man was symbolized for Noah by the rainbow. The psychedelic experience is the magical iridescence that is thrown off ordinary matter, vouchsafing some kind of insight into a transcendent level of organization that is behind appearances. Anybody want to say anything? Yeah.
I had a question. I wondered what role the psychedelics had in creating the differences between the religions that come out of the Orient and the ones that come out of the Middle East and our imperative tradition.
Well, as I wrote this book for Bantam and trying to study the relationship of drugs to culture over thousands of years in many places. And what I came to feel was that in a cultural situation where you have a strong plant hallucinogen, one of these pipeline to the goddess plants, women will tend to be in the powerful positions in the society because I'm convinced that women were the developers of language, that the gathering part of the hunting-gathering equation which was the women's part, had more evolutionary pressure on it to develop syntax in order to differentiate these hundreds and hundreds of plants, some toxic, some food. And I think that when the primal partnership society on the Saharan grasslands of Africa began to break up, it happened very slowly, you see. At the climax of the African cattle goddess mushroom partnership equilibrium, my supposition is that probably mushrooms were being taken every 2 weeks or month in a group situation with group sexual practices because of the CNS arousal component of the psilocybin being what was going on. Well, okay, so this is the experience that these people were building their civilization around, and it was an experience of boundary dissolution, tribal-mindedness, group sensuality, and group values. Well, as the African continent dried up and this pastoral lifestyle became more and more difficult to support, and the distance between water holes over centuries, we're talking now, grew greater, it became harder and harder to hold these mushroom ceremonies on time, to have this experience regularly, to keep it part of the society, and eventually it died out. And there was also another factor working here, which was as the climate dried, it became more and more important to find a way to preserve the mushrooms so that they could be used then at the regular ceremonies. Well, the preferred agent for preservation, I discovered in the Neolithic, was honey. Well, the only problem with that is that honey itself is a natural product subject to fermentation. So as the mushrooms got scarcer and the climate drier, and there were more and more preserved mushrooms in honey, and then fewer and fewer preserved mushrooms in more and more honey, you got a slow switch over to a mead cult, an alcohol cult. And at that very early period in the Middle East, then you get the emergence of the dominator model. At 9,500 BC, from Scandinavia to Arabia, you get what's called the Tanged Point Techno-Complex. Means suddenly a lot of chipped flint, not distributed along river bottoms where game was frequent, but distributed on the wrong side of walls around former habitation sites. In other words, war has come to the world of 9,500 BC. This is because great agriculture over-succeeded. Surpluses meant sedentary lifestyles and defense of inventories. Suddenly there were people who had food and people who didn't have food, and a whole economy of pillage and strife emerged. So I'm really very unenamored of monotheism in all of its forms. I understand its philosophical attraction. One, it's the attraction of simplicity. Let there be one God. After all, isn't that the simplest solution? But taking a Jungian tack on that, we image in our personalities the kinds of gods that we permit ourselves to worship. And if you have an image of God as omnipotent, omnipresent, infallible, all-seeing, this is the dominator archetype incarnate, and then everyone images it in their psyche, and you get the birth of the ego. This thing, it's like a tumor that forms in the personality in the absence of psilocybin. In the absence of psilocybin, these assumptions begin to get going about my territory, my women, my food, and there's no end to it. It's the death of everything. So this long strain of dominator culture that comes out of the Middle East gets unfortunately reinforced, whether serendipitously or by design is not clear, by the choice of a phonetic alphabet to put down these early Middle Eastern languages. You see, phonetic alphabet gives tremendous permission for abstraction, because what is symbolized is not a little picture, not the thing, but the sound of the name of the thing. So you're 3 steps removed. It isn't enough that you communicate in symbols. Here you don't communicate in symbols. You communicate in a still 1 stage further removed thing. So, cultural styles are, I believe, drug-based, based on very old relationships with intoxicants. And it basically divides along 2 lines. The soporific, these things which loosen social strictures and give permission to express the dominator model, and then these other more nebulous, visionary kinds of things. So it's a suppression versus enhancement thing. This might be a good point to make the point, since there's so much talk about drugs in today's world, that the pro-psychedelic position is an anti-drug position. That should be clear, because the way I think of drugs and what is objectionable about them is by analyzing cause and effect. Well, what is it that we don't like about drugs? Well, we don't like that they cause unexamined, repetitive, self-destructive behavior. In other words, they make you stupid and self-destructive and habitual on those items. Well, this is precisely the kind of behavior patterning that psychedelics break up and destroy. You cannot carry out unexamined, self-destructive, habitual behavior in the presence of psychedelics, because they will show you too strong an image of the consequences. You know, these amazing statistics that were reported with curing alcoholism with LSD before they made LSD illegal, where they would give chronic alcoholics 1 500 gamma LSD trip with a sitter, and something like 60% of these people were going dry and sticking with it. Well, people said, my God, LSD is a cure for alcoholism. No, it's a cure for stupidity. It's not a cure for alcoholism. That's infantile. It merely gives you an image of the consequences of your behavior. And this image is so horrifying that you modify your behavior forthwith. Yes. Yeah.
I would like to ask Nicole, please. I wasn't clear, and I would be very interested in when you experienced, for example, the ayahuasca with the people. Was this with women or was this with men?
It was with a mixed group.
Was it a mixed group?
Yes.
Was there ever a time when it was just with women? And
No.
Would there have been
No. They don't think about it that way. People just go. People. Yes. Someone who has a problem, perhaps is hoping to solve it, and by finding out what happened to his wallet or her string of pearls or something like that. Of course, they don't very often wear pearls in that society, but it's a totally heterogeneous group. It's whoever happens to come, with the permission of the shaman, of course.
And you've never been able to determine, for example, any difference in symbolism or visual material that would come perhaps from a feminine psyche as from a masculine psyche?
I don't know of one. There seem to be far fewer women who have taken it.
Would you know why, or would you?
No, I don't know why. Women usually take it when they're in tribal situations, in the culture. The ones who are not too acculturated usually take it when they are ill. And frequently it is a diagnostic tool for the shaman. He takes it with the woman, and then he knows where the evil dot has gone that is making her ill, and how to remove it.
Thank you. I'm interested in the relationship of the psychedelic experience and the art process. In that when I choose to have a psychedelic experience, I make a conscious choice to take ayahuasca or LSD or whatever, and choose and control the time and place and the company I'm in. But when it comes over me in an uncontrollable way, when I get an idea for a form or a painting or something like that, it's not something that I can control. And it's a similar process in that you go into a different experiential mode. And I found that we can sit here and talk about this and we laugh about elves and things, but in the real world, people don't like it. It's like Main Street, where you were talking about Main Street. If this happens to me and I feel like I really need to do my work because the muse is there, I can't say, well, the muse is here, I have to go paint. Somebody else empty the garbage. People get angry at me and say, that's irresponsible. There's no place for an artist or a seer unless you've got, say you're Terence Mckenna, so therefore it's okay for you to come off the wall because you're going to be funny and entertaining, but it's not okay for just, any old person like me to do that.
You're about to get what you came for. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
You lose your job.
Well, then you can do what I do. The reason I do this is because I lost my job, and no, I mean, I see what you're saying. I mean, it is problematic. If one person believes it, it's a psychosis. If two people, it's a folie à deux. 3, a cult. 4, a movement, and so on. What we're trying to do here is empower the meme, give permission, and say, you just got comfortable with gays and black people. Well, guess what? You're now going to have to elbow over one step further because there are all us lodies out here. And we're tired of being thought of as stupid. We're not stupid. In fact, we're smarter than you are. And, we're tired of being this is not the Cheech and Chong hour. So, and then the deeper answer to your question about art is I think that these two things are basically spun together and are completely one and the same process. I mean, on a historical scale, the way I think of these psychedelics as they're catalysts for ideas. They are actually like enzymes. An enzyme, let me define a catalyst first. A catalyst is a chemical which makes a reaction go faster, but it isn't itself consumed in the reaction. And an enzyme is an organic catalyst. Okay, so psilocybin, these things, they're like organic enzymes for creativity, for the imagination. We have this peculiar faculty called the imagination. It's like a wonderful, omni-adaptable hand. It's an internalized hand. We use the imagination to grasp situations and to remake models of reality. And this is what's given us the one-up on the tapir, the cheetah, the gorilla, is, the imagination. Now, artists have always been, the carriers of the banner of the imagination. but it becomes much more cogent and pregnant with importance in the modern context, because the whole cultural enterprise is becoming designed. I mean, I don't have to tell this to people from LA. LA is one of the most heavily designed cities in the world. The entire cultural fabric, the coral reef of human accretions, is becoming an expression of art. And I think this is, we might as well talk about this now, or at least brush by it. This is where our future lies, in the realm of the imagination, somehow. I mean, I can't quite put all the pieces together for you this afternoon, but some afternoon I will. It's just not, I don't know what to say yet. It's too early. But downstream, and the technology is already taking shape, we are going to go into the imagination. We are going to live in a world that touches the earth no more lightly, no more heavily than a thought. And this is a reasonable cultural goal. Money can be made doing this. This is not sky blue stuff. We can retool the culture toward this revivifying of archaic sensation, and make money at it, and back off a little from this other thing, which is so tremendously destructive. And it basically has to do with turning it over to artists. People ask, what can I do? What can little me do in this onrushing planetary chaostrophe that has seized everyone? Well, I think the answer is cognitive activity, dance, poetry, painting, writing, computer graphics, code writing, whatever your gig is. But cognitive activity is our salvation. It always has been, and it must be now. There's no going back.